Hello, everyone, and welcome to PressThis, the WordPress community podcast on WMR. This is your host, David Vogelpohl. I support the WordPress community through my role at WP Engine, and I love to bring the best of the community to you here every week on PressThis. As a reminder, you can follow me on Twitter at WPDavidV, and you can subscribe to PressThis on Red Circle, iTunes, Spotify, or download the latest episodes at WMR.fm. In this episode, I'm really excited to discuss this. We're going to be talking about exactly who is this WordPress. And joining us for that conversation, I would like to welcome from HeroPress, Mr. Topher DeRosia. Topher, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
So excited to have you on. I know that, I've really enjoyed talking to you at WordCamps over the years. And so now I'm going to talk to you and PressThis. It's a little bit
Seems appropriate.
I know. So switch things up a little bit, especially with the pandemic kind of limiting our access to WordCamps. But for everyone listening, we're going to explore basically topics with Topher based on his experience running HeroPress. And if you're unfamiliar, HeroPress, it really gives a voice to the WordPress community. And Topher is going to kind of go into some of the specifics behind it as part of the interview, but really kind of also looking at how he views the lessons he derived from that work and how he thinks of WordPress at large. So really excited to do this interview with you here today, Topher. So thanks for joining me. Topher, I'm going to ask you the same question I ask every guest, and was also a question when you created your WordPress.org profile, if you'll remember that from back in the day. But could you briefly tell me your WordPress origin story? When was the first time you used WordPress?
The first time I used it was not long after 1.0 was released. I wanted to get into blogging in the late 90s. A couple of my friends did it, and I tried getting into it. And this was really before I was a programmer. And so what was involved is things like downloading Perl modules and stuff like that. And I said, nope, not for me. And then I learned PHP, and then in the early 2000s, WordPress came out, and I looked at it and said, well, I could do this. And so I was teaching at the time at a university, Intro to Web Development, and I required my students to each have a project each semester. And so one semester I did a project myself to build a blog, and I did. And I used it for 10 or 11 years. It was very simple. It was not at all like WordPress. But then, so like through the 2000s, I built custom PHP MySQL apps. And I got really tired of building admin interfaces and all that kind of stuff and dealing with security. So when WordPress 3.0 came out in 2010, I looked at it and said, oh, those are custom post types. That's exactly what I needed. And I haven't really done anything besides WordPress ever since, which I now think was a mistake. But I have been all in on WordPress for 12 years now.
Interesting. Now you said WordPress version 1.0. Do you mean the first version or literally version 1.0? Did you know the first version of WordPress? Yeah, okay. It was 0.7. I didn't know if you were familiar with it. Yeah.
Because I remember the splash. That's what made me look at it again. So boy, I'm remembering memories now. So the mere fact that I remembered, like I saw the splash come out and knew what it was, means that I probably was aware of WordPress in the .7.8 range.
Okay.
But when 1.0 came out, it made me look at it seriously again.
I never realized it started at 0.7 until I got the backstory interviewing Mike Little on a prior episode. But that's pretty early. And then it sounds like you were building, we've had a couple of episodes actually about this recently on PressThis, WordPress as an application framework, but it seemed like that 2010 moment with custom post types and fields was really what kind of brought you into the fold fully through your application development work. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, very much so. That was a real paradigm change for WordPress from blogging tool to CMS.
Wow, you're like taking the words right out of my mouth. I've mentioned that same paradigm multiple times on PressThis. I have a whole presentation around it. I actually have a big star in 2010 because of the paradigm change. It happened. And of course,
Yeah,
now we're going through Gutenberg.
yeah, and it is another. I would say it's as big or not, if not bigger,
Yep.
but definitely as significant a change.
All right. So you've seen a lot of change, and I know you've seen it firsthand, but you've also seen it through the voices that you share through HeroPress. So and for those unfamiliar, what is HeroPress and how did it come to be?
HeroPress started as a website, HeroPress.com, that is a collection of essays from people all over the world who have leveraged WordPress or the community to make their lives better. We have essays from single moms who can work from home and not have to put their kids in daycare, older folks on their third or fourth career, people in, I don't know how you say it, repressed economies, making really excellent wages for their part of the world. Um, just people from everywhere, how they found WordPress and it really changed everything for them.
That
Recently,
resonates. I was going to say that
yeah, go ahead.
resonates for me because I asked this, tell me your origin story of every guest. And I've done this like 230 some odd time weeks in a row. And so I get a lot of
Uh-huh.
these stories and it just resonates. So like, I could see you're like seeing that in the moment, but like, how did you think to start the site? Like, why did you start it?
That's a great story. I love this story. Um, in 2014 or 15, I think 15, I was working for XWP, which is a WordPress um, agency, and uh, the owner was not really involved in the company anymore. He handed off to managers, and he was out doing other things in the world. And one day, he sent me an email right before Thanksgiving and said, "You're not working for XWP anymore. I want you to build something new and great for WordPress." And that was all the email said. Like, I got up for work, and that was my email. And I'm like, "So now what? What do I do?" So I emailed him. I said, "What am I doing?" And he said, "That's your journey to discover." And he was giving me freedom to build something new and great, anything I wanted. He envisioned a business, a product, um, but I struggled to come up with a new product. And he had hired an Indian web development agency and said to me, "If you need to build something, use them. I paid their time for a month. Just they're your team now." So I got to be good friends with one of the guys there. His name was Jeet, and at first he was very formal, a contractor talking to his employer. But over the weeks, we got to know each other better and better and became friends. And one evening, he expressed frustration that his agency was having a really hard time getting good contracts from the West, from the US, basically. They were basically a bunch of contractors who got together thinking that if they were a team, they could do better. And it wasn't working out. And he didn't know why. And I said, "Well, I don't know business. I'm not a business guy. And I don't know India. So I don't know how to help you." But I couldn't let it go. And I asked some friends if they had any ideas. And Sam Seidler, who now works for Human Made, said to me, "WordCamp Mumbai just happened, and the organizers are successful WordPress businessmen in India. You should ask them." And I thought, "Oh, that's a great idea." So I connected them, and they did. They had great information for him. They helped him out. Um, and I thought, well, what if um, we went around the world and found people who were successful and had them do a presentation to their peers, whether it's their countrymen or whatever. Um, and so we were going to do something like TED. Do you remember, TED, the videos?
Sure.
Yeah, we were going to do TED. So we were going to travel around the world with a camera crew and find people who were brilliant and have them do a talk to, at the time we were very geographically focused. So, the people around them.
So you're kind of given this mission to do something new and great for WordPress. You kind of
Yeah,
discover this kind of situation with Jeet, and you get the kind of synergy with the other group out of Mumbai. And you're thinking like, okay, TED Talks and a few of them. And I'm really curious how this parlays into what HeroPress is today. We're going to take
yeah.
our first break, and we'll be
All
right
right.
back.
Time to plug into a commercial break. Stay tuned for more Press This in just a moment.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Press This, the WordPress community podcast on WMR. We're in the middle of our episode discovering exactly who WordPress is. And joining us for that conversation is Topher DeRosia of HeroPress. Topher, right before the break, you were telling us this kind of origin story of HeroPress and how you wanted to kind of do these kind of TED Talk style videos all around the world of people telling their WordPress story. I'm curious, though, how does that then parlay into what HeroPress is today?
Yeah, well, it's very expensive to take a camera crew around the world. So Dave, the guy who started this, said that we needed to do a Kickstarter, and we were looking for 60,000 Australian dollars because he's Australian. It was an Australian company, which is about 48,000 US. And what I didn't know at the time is that more than the money, what he was looking for is interest. So what he really wanted was 60,000 $1 donations. He wanted to hear from 60,000 people that, yes, this is a good thing. On the first day, we got $25,000, but then that was kind of it. We did not, the Kickstarter was not successful, and the project failed. And part of the deal was that I was all in on this, so I didn't work at XWP anymore, and it was over. And so I went job hunting. But people started emailing me saying, hey, this project was important. Please don't let it go. I thought, well, I'm unemployed. I'm not going overseas with the video crew. So how could I do this? And I thought that if it were in text, then the contributors could create it themselves and just email it to me. There's no traveling. There's no months of editing fancy videos. They can publish weekly if we wanted to. And so I went to one of the people who was going to do it, and I said, would you just write it? He said, sure. That's Andrei Savchenko. He's the first one. And it worked. And then I thought, oh no, I have to get another one for next week. And so I contacted somebody else. And it was like 4 weeks before I realized maybe I should think ahead and get a whole bunch of these.
But so you have I noticed on your site that you have 19 pages of contributors. I guess you're kind of getting into how or why you did that, but I'm just curious, like, why so many contributors? I guess it sounds like you're trying to tell as many stories as possible.
Yeah.
And like, how does contributing work? Like, I guess if other people were curious about contributing.
There's an open form on the website that you can apply to do an essay. But the vast majority of them are people that I find and explain what I'm doing and ask them nicely if they will do an essay. And most people say, no, my story is boring, or I'm not interesting, or I have nothing to say. And after a conversation, they're like, wow, I had no idea that I had all this stuff. So I think only 3 people ever have convinced me that they should not do an essay. So
what do you think? Like, I mean, I know WordPress, and I mean, I've benefited from this personally, provides a medium for learning, building websites and optimizing websites. Do you feel like it's like imposter syndrome or just busyness, or like, what do you think the reluctance is at first?
a lot of people really feel like they're not interesting. Like everyone else must be more interesting. Why would anyone want to read about me? And it's not very hard at all to have a conversation with somebody and learn something about them and go, that's fascinating to me. I had no idea that anyone had ever done this or said that or lived there or all that stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, for me, it's kind of about this. It kind of reminds me of like volunteering for WordPress. Is like, I don't want to be at the I can't even think today, the support table at a WordCamp. What are those called, Topher? Do you recall? whatever. Anyways, I don't want to be at that
Yeah.
because I don't feel I'm technical enough. And you're like, well, you're more technical than someone, right? There's someone you might
Yes.
actually be able to help there. And I think that's probably, I guess, a blocker for people is thinking like, well, what I have is in advanced. It's like, it's advanced for somebody. Like you have something to
Yeah.
share. Yeah.
Yeah. It's the same issue getting people to speak at WordCamp. What do I know? Who would want to listen to me? Well, I would want to listen.
Yeah. And I think, having done, like I said, 230 or so of these episodes and asked everybody what their origin story is, it just repeated over and over and over and over again, this kind of life-changing aspect for
Yeah.
so many people. And how they got into it could have been a friend, it could have been they saw it online,
Yep.
a job interview, whatever the thing was, there's some kind of hook. But it's really interesting as a technology and as a community. And I think it's, fairly common-ish in open source. I just don't think to the degree that WordPress is, and certainly not
Yeah.
outside of WordPress. I haven't found any other technology community nearly as supportive, both from a technology perspective, but both with a community perspective in terms of growth. Do you experience that?
I have had some folks from the Drupal community say, "Oh, this sounds like my community." It's not
Yeah.
exactly
Drupal,
the same.
Joomla. Yep.
Yeah. But I haven't
So
experienced it like with Mozilla or something like that. I've heard the PHP community is pretty tight.
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think largely there are a lot of good examples in open source for sure. So you have these contributors, you kind of find them around the way, figure they have an interesting story, ask them to contribute, and they're thinking like, well, what do I have to talk about that's interesting or not? How do they then, so you convince them to do it, but how do
Hmm.
you think the contributors choose their topics to share specifically in the
Ah,
HeroPress context?
yeah. So there's two basic rules. One is you have to include your WordPress origin story, but the other is that each contributor is writing to their peers, and they get to decide who that is. It could be people their age, their gender, their ethnicity, their culture, uh, people with their own name. Doesn't matter. They get to pick. They get to decide who would benefit from hearing this story. Who's going to hear me and say, "Oh, that's like me. Maybe I could do this."
So
And
it's not writing to an audience, like it's not like I'm a technical person and I'm going to write to a marketer to educate them. They're going to try to pick someone that is kind of a birds of a feather, if you will, in terms of either like technology choice or geography, like those kind of things.
right. Although they could if they want. I mean, it's totally up to them who they write to. Um, but it's really about enablement. How did WordPress enable you? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Um,
okay, no, that totally makes sense. So it's about the essays primarily are focused around either speaking to peers or just generally an audience, and then really, but through the focus of how to leverage WordPress to help you in your career or life.
right. And that's one of the reasons you asked, like, why there are so many. And it's because many of them are writing to the people who live around them, people they went to college with, people who speak their language or live in their country or have their culture. Um,
So with all these
so,
people and with all these different potential, topics and things like this, in the last couple of minutes before our next break, what are some of the themes that have emerged from some of these essays over the years?
oh boy, a great example is today. I talked with a woman today. I said, "Have you ever heard of HeroPress?" She said, "No," and I gave 3 sentences. I said, "What I've just told you, HeroPress is essays about from people who've had their lives changed by WordPress." And she got so excited. She's like, "Yes, this is great. My life was terrible." She was at a dead end job that she hated, and she read a blog about starting an online store with WordPress, and she did that, and she got so good at building it that she started doing it for other people, and now she's like a community manager at a WordPress agency or something. It's completely revolutionized her life, and that's really common. A lot of people get into it for one reason, whatever it may be. Maybe they want to be a blogger because they lost their job or something. and they find that they like it and they're good at it, and it just grows, and then they're making a living with it, and everything is different.
So if I'm hearing you, that the theme, one of the themes is that many, if not maybe most people, actually changes their way of working, the job they have, the job they're doing. Not so much I'm switching from Drupal to WordPress per se, but more almost transitioning like my career in a sense, was a theme I heard you say. I'm not sure if you
Oh
would agree
yeah,
with that.
yeah, very much so.
Oh yeah, and I've
We have
seen that.
one from a guy who was a construction worker and was in a terrible accident and spent 6 or 8 months in bed and was bored silly, and there was a computer there, and so he started messing around with WordPress, and by the time he got out of the hospital, he had a new career.
Yeah, I can definitely, join the chorus there on that one with the stories that I've heard. It is really amazing how dominant that theme actually is within WordPress. I really want to kind of unpack a little bit more about your views on the community, but we're going to take our last break and we'll be right back.
Time to plug into a commercial break. Stay tuned for more Press This in just a moment.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Press This, the WordPress community podcast on WMR. We're learning exactly who is WordPress with Topher DeRosia of HeroPress. Topher, right before the break, you were talking a little bit about the themes that have emerged from HeroPress, and we were talking a little bit about this kind of notion that WordPress, in a sense, kind of changes your career, not just like a new tech you learn because you're always building sites, but this theme that many, if not most, that experience almost a change of career. Were there any other themes that stood out to you over the years?
Yeah, I've struggled with whether this is a WordPress thing or an open source thing, but there are a lot of people who work in not Western countries who are able to get remote jobs with really excellent pay compared to their neighbors. There's a guy that I'm still talking to about an essay. He lives in Bangladesh, and a bunch of years ago he got married and they had a kid, and he had to leave his very small village to go live in the big city to make enough money to support his family. So he didn't live with his wife and child. They stayed home. And then he got a job with a large WordPress company that you absolutely know, but I'm not going to tell you. And they have a policy of paying everybody the same. So him in his small village in Bangladesh was making the same as somebody in San Francisco or London, which, as you can imagine, is pretty dramatically different for cost of living. And so now he supports his entire extended family, 30 or 40 people.
45, according to the person who tells the story, and he tells it publicly. So since you're not mentioning their name, I won't, but I heard him mention it publicly at a WordCamp. But yeah, that's an amazing part. So you got to tell that story on HeroPress?
Not yet, but I'm working on
Oh,
it.
you're going to? Yeah, I definitely
Yeah.
sign me up to read that one for sure, because I've heard that gentleman speak of that in the past from that company, and I think that's a really cool part. Now, like one of the things we've touched on a little bit here during this interview is the notion of the community aspect of WordPress, not just the tech. Do you feel like that's really important to most people, or is it really just, a vocal few that happen to engage, or do you think that it's a dominant part of the value most people get out of WordPress?
It's hard to say. It feels to me like it's the biggest deal of all. But then I look at the actual number of people in the whole world that use WordPress, and I'll bet most of them don't care.
I think for me, it's like a product of the community, is like the documentation, the thought leadership, the technologies that are available. Those things I think everyone relies on, even if they don't participate in the community. But I think that those things don't really exist without the community.
Yeah, I would agree with that. WordPress as a project, WordPress wouldn't exist without the community. It's just, there's no question.
So speaking about the community and WordPress existing, we have a whole new generation of web developers that are coming out of school, and looking to learn, or maybe not looking, maybe incidentally end up learning web development like those in WordPress have. What are your views on paths for young people starting building with WordPress? Like, how will we nurture the next generation of the WordPress community?
Oh boy. I think there are two steps. One, I think it has to be deliberate. If we don't pay attention to it and do it on purpose, it's not going to happen. But I think also what we practically need to do is make it fun, easy, and interesting. I know a lot of people that got into web development by hacking templates on LiveJournal, which wasn't even real HTML. It was like LiveJournal code. And they just got into it because it was fun and it was easy. There was, dramatic changes in just a few minutes. And I think if we can continue to make WordPress like that, then we will continue to get young people who just find that fun.
So is this like WordCamps or better? Like, I know like the training group has spent quite a lot of time. I know Courtney Robertson's part of that, and the core volunteer groups really spending a lot of time focusing on kind of teaching young people WordPress. Like, is that your view? Is like, it's like almost like course content and things like kid camps at WordCamps, or like, what are your thoughts?
I don't think so. Kid camps might get it, but kids don't want to read courses. They don't want to read. They don't want to learn stuff like that. They want to figure it out on their own. That magical learning where they're like, "Ooh, that's neat. Let me push a button and see what happens."
Yeah. So like trial and break and then repeat.
Yeah. So I mentioned LiveJournal. If there was a site like it, if WordPress.com were more hackable, more twistable, then more kids would get into it. Tumblr was like this for a little while. When Tumblr first came out, it was very popular with young people because they could just fiddle with it and easily make themes without any coding and stuff like that.
Yeah, you talked about this earlier, like that kind of instant gratification from making minor, tweaks and seeing major changes. And I think that's a really good point to hone in on and thinking about how we nurture the next generation beyond just in-person or virtual learning. But in any case, this has been super interesting. Thank you so much for joining me today, Topher.
Oh, you're welcome.
If
appreciate you having me.
Yeah, of course. So glad to have you. We'll have to have you back. For those listening, if you'd like to learn more about what Topher is up to, please visit HeroPress.com. Again, this has been your host, David Vogelpohl. I support the WordPress community through my role at WP Engine, and I love to bring the best of the community to you here every week on PressThis.
The opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of WebmasterRadio.fm's management or sponsors. Any rebroadcast or redistribution without authorized consent of WebmasterRadio.fm is prohibited.